Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I'm here with Joe and we're going to be having another of our discussion videos. Today we're going to be talking about Worlds. Worlds is coming up in the next few weeks. I think it's 2 or 3 weeks away from now. So we're going to run down sort of a list of decks that you're going to probably want to be testing against. You're going to expect to see at Worlds, and then at the end we're going to give sort of our approach on what we think could definitely reach the top tables and maybe even win the overall tournament. So yeah, make sure you look out for all of these decks. We've got quite a few to talk about, but we're going to try and keep it relatively brief because we don't want too long of a video. But yeah, we're going to start off with Toad. So Joe, do you want to start off with what you can see from what we're going to be expecting to see from Toad at least?
Yeah, well, Toad straight back on the map thanks to good old Jason and his Fennekin coins. Yeah, really strong, very safe bet if you're going for Worlds, which I think a lot of people who at least make it to Worlds, they know that playing the safe, playing the best decks is a good way of getting yourself far into tournaments. So there's plenty of ways you can go down the Toad route, of course. There is the Garbodor variant that Jason piloted. You could actually even net deck his list card for card. I don't know how good that might be. I personally don't love it as a 100% list, but it's obviously good to some extent. Garbodor as well is going to be safe, especially because looking at like Nat's results, I think that's the best way we can sort of metagame for Worlds. We know that Kling Klang and Metal were around, so Garbodor is a great way to shut that sort of stuff off. Also, Safeguarders can be something that can be a problem for Toad, so Garb is good there. Also, you could play Bats as a way of increasing your output, which is another option to go down. Also helps you somewhat in the mirror match, I guess. And then there's also ways of playing Toad with stuff like Manectric. I know the top 8, one of the top 8 lists played a combination of Toad and Manectric to sort of cover each other's weaknesses, help out as well, putting more late game damage with Manectric coming out to sort of overtake the Toad to get good knockouts there. So plenty of avenues for Toad, very strong as always with the Train Lock, and pretty much any partner is a good option for Toad right now.
Yeah, obviously Toad's so consistent, and whilst it's one of the decks that I think we're both expecting to see huge numbers of, it's actually one we're going to it's going to be one of the decks we talk about most briefly, because Toad is just Toad. There's nothing sort of special about it other than the fact it's such a good card. It's so consistent. There's nothing really new that's come out of the woodwork. Everyone's known about Toad Garb all along. It just happened to take Jason to be able to provide a list that people can start from. And like Joe said, you can begin by net decking that list, but there's definitely changes that could be made, especially as the metagame sort of changed over the past couple of weeks, and it will do leading into Worlds. But it's definitely a good starting point. I know the lists are for everyone to see, so if you're not really sure how to start with the deck, use Jason's just as a guide, even if there are certain changes you'd like to make. Yeah, Bats just increases damage. I'm going to move on to Manectric, because I think Manectric is a really good call at the moment. Manectric is just a really efficient attacker. 2 energy, whether you're using the Mega or not, either 2 energy, you're going to be doing preferably 120 or 110, both really good numbers just for 2 energy. It means you don't have to expend a lot of resources into setting up a Manectric. And then there's so many sort of different avenues you can go with Manectric. Like Joe said, you can pair it with Toad, and then things like either Garbodor or Suicune, just to sort of always have different options with your Manectric deck. You can sort of base a Rough Seas build around it, with things like Keldeo, Suicune, Articuno, just being able to have a variety of different attackers. Then you've got the Mega as well, just to sort of move around the damage, stop your opponent taking one hit knockouts with Rough Seas. If they don't take 1 hit knockouts, sorry, it makes them harder, because then with Rough Seas you're moving the damage around, reducing it, and it's just a really sort of solid play at the moment, because it's got a lot of energy manipulation with the being able to get the energy back with the Mega Manectric. I really like the Rough Seas build at the moment. There's also the Ninetales style build you can play it with, locking in Rough Seas, which is another really good way, because stadiums are so big at the moment, whether it's Verbank or Skyfield. There's just loads of different stadiums, and the stadium war is just going to get stronger, but Ninetales sort of make sure that stadium's locked in for you, and if your opponent really needs a stadium to push for their strategy to get through, they then have to go out of their way to deal with the Ninetales, which is really annoying, and can really slow some opponents down. Especially again with how consistent Manectric can be because of how low energy cost it is. It also loves it when you can get a head ringer on one of your opponent's EXs, because you're just increasing your damage as well as slowing them down. It's really good. Obviously Manectric's really good against Ray, which we'll touch on a little bit later on, but with a lot of people are choosing to take out the Altaria line now, just for 2 cards worth of consistency, which means Manectric just gets even better. It preys on so many different Ray decks, and even if they do decide to keep the Altaria line in, it's very rarely more than a 1-1, and even with the 1-1 you can sort of find ways to deal with it, whether you're playing it with Toad or with other cards. It's not the end of the world if they're playing the Altaria line anymore. I think a lot of people thought the Altaria line was going to be an immediate inclusion in Ray, but with the consistency that it takes away, a lot of people are deciding to take out the Altaria line now. So that just makes Manectric even better. And then also, Manectric Bats, I think, is a little bit of a sleeper. Not many people really talk about this too much, but Manectric Bats can really put damage counters on the board. It's sort of a dumbed down version of Landorus Bats, because you're not doing quite as much damage with Manectric, but you've got a much more accessible second attack, only requiring 2 energy, and being able to again prey on any of your opponent's Pokemon that have tools attached to them. You can really sort of choose your knockout so much easier with the Bats. It's really nice, and like I said, I think it's a bit of a sleeper at the moment. Not many people are really talking about it. So I think Manectric is a really strong play. And then obviously right at the end we've got Manectric Garbodor, just a really consistent Manectric Garbodor list. Manectric doesn't use any abilities anyway, so running it with the Garbodor is always going to hinder your opponent more than hinder yourself. You're probably going to run the Mega with that as well, just for versatility and being able to stream Manectric. And then obviously Manectric has outs that max potion and everything. There's just so many little tools that Manectric can use that have come out in the past few sets that I think makes Manectric a really good play, especially since Ray I think is going to be relatively big at Worlds, just because Ray is another really good choice at the moment. But I think Manectric's definitely there to keep it in check at the moment.
Yeah, it really is. Its typing is just fantastic for the meta right now. Having the Rough Seas means you can fight it out with Toad, sort of staying healthy enough. Obviously the Lightning typing, really good against Ray. And even just having the resistance to metal and the fact that it really doesn't care about having to use specials, it means it can really trade nicely against metal decks. They have to really push to get like 2 hits sometimes when you consider the resistance plus the Rough Seas, and of course they have accessibility to 1 or 2 max potion that they're most likely going to play, so it can definitely keep up and always have like a good scrap against every other deck in the format. So if you're a good player, it's something that's going to get you into the game at least, and then it's down to your own ability to try and make you win that game. And I think a lot of people will go for that just because you're always going to sit down and have a game whatever you're up against. So that's something that I feel will be really appealing to players for Manectric. Next up is Metal. We've seen a few variants of Metal coming around now. It was only really since the ban of Trump Card where Metal sprang up in Canadian Nationals, and it started off with a Metal Boxy type build with Bronzong, and then you're just using these other techs like Heatran as a great non-EX attacker, having Dialga, Cobalion to help out with Toad, and also get through Safeguarders. Then also, of course, the Kingpin is Aegislash with so much specials energy around Aegislash with Steel Shelter as well. Really helping you against Toad out a lot, especially if they're not even playing the hammers. Some Toad decks, since the Trump Card ban, have decided to drop out on the hammers for a majority of the time anyway, so you can sort of outrun them with Bronzong, and then Aegislash is finally set up, and then he's swinging, and the Toad player is really doing nothing against you. And it's a similar story for like Rayquaza and stuff. They don't like really having to get around Aegislash, so that sort of boxy build, also having like a Mewtwo maybe here and there. A Kecleon was something that we saw being played just to again help out with Ray and Raichu and stuff. So as a boxy build, you can basically tack it to what you expect to happen at Worlds, and I think having a boxy style is obviously going to give you a good chance if you can pretty much predict the metagame right. Next up is the Kling Clang build, pretty much more dedicated to just trying to get out this stage 2 to give you the Plasma Steel, I think it's called, the ability.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
That you're immune, all your metal types are immune from EXs, just pretty much a lock deck. I think just the fear of that, we saw it got to top 8 US Nats, I think it was, or top 16, I think, I can't remember. I think Dylan Bryan played it, right?
Yeah, I believe it was top 16?
I can't remember. It might even be top 8, I can't remember.
It definitely did well. Yeah, it definitely did really well.
So, like, it's on the radar now, so people are going to play Garbodor. So I think Kling Clang has to sort of, like, go down and... it's like more risky now. People just didn't even know about Kling Clang or didn't even think about it going into US Nats, but it was it's more of a thing now, so people are more worried about it, and thus people are going to try and get around it a bit better. And then finally, it's the Metal Ray type build. Basically, you're still playing the Sky Fields. You're playing like 3-3 or 4-3 Ray with just a couple of metal techs, like having a Heatran in there to try and make it a 7-prize game every now and again and get you through safeguarders. And obviously, you can fill your bench with a couple of Bronzors that eventually become Bronzongs to help you throughout the game keep your Rayquazas going and not having to rely on Nega Turbo the whole game, especially helping out against Toad so you can keep trading prizes. I think that's Rayquaza in general. Obviously, it's a powerhouse that we have at the moment, and I think Metal is one of the best ways that we can really support Ray, because we can throw in the Keldeo Float combo and then have 1 or 2 extra techs that can help you in matchups, and also it gives you an out instead of having Altaria to try and like defend against Manectric, which can still be Lysandered up, killed, and then you're pretty much back at square one. Especially because the Manectric player, once they get the knockout, they can Turbo Bolt to a bench. So even if they like catch her up, Altaria, kill it, and then you think, oh, okay, cool, I can just kill their Mega. Well, they've got another one ready, pretty much, so then they kill your Ray, and then it's sort of like a trade-off, but they've always got acceleration, and you're pretty much struggling to find your DCEs. That's pretty much how the Manectric goes, even if they do play Altaria. If you just play a Metal build, you can just try and stall out Ray as long as possible, try and use like your 1-off Aegislash to try and hold off for a turn or two, so I think the Metal build gives it a lot of good options.
Yeah, I mean, just because there's a lot of Manectric, I think that makes Metal Ray even better, which is kind of weird to think about because Manectric's also got resistance against Metal, but a single Ray can still really screw up a Manectric player because just how good Ray is. I've actually seen a lot of lists sort of dropping the Rayquaza line down to a 3-2 and just focusing a lot more on the Metal sort of element of it because it can still really screw people up, having it a bit more of a boxy type, sort of a mix of the box and the Quasar build. But yeah, moving on to Ray, I think definitely Metal is the best way to play Ray at the moment. It's so consistent. You can stream Rayquazas a lot better. You do lose a lot of the time. You do lose out on the quicker sort of turbo builds that go for the 240-10-1, but a lot of the time that's not that important. When you've got a decent setup, you can more consistently hit the 240 damage. And with like Joe said, with the Metal Ray, you can have it a bit more of a box type, and if you can predict the metagame, you can put in your metal attackers based on what you think you're going to see. Aegislash is obviously going to be a really good one. Again, Heatran can turn it into a 7-prize game. It's just a really good deck at the moment. I think Ray is definitely going to be represented, no matter whether Manectric's represented or not, because Ray and Manectric can really sort of trade off a lot better than a lot of people think they can. It's not 100% going to go to Manectric just because they've got weakness and resistance. It's sometimes Ray can really give it a run for its money. But there are other ways of running Ray. You can still run sort of the Virizion or speed builds, which, like I just said, go for the 240 turn 1 just to try and get sort of ahead so quickly, taking 2 prizes before your opponent's even started really properly setting up. I feel the problem with these is just they're still relatively inconsistent. Whilst they go all out for the turn 1 Rayquaza, so it is still big enough to stop them if they just purely run item draw support, because all of a sudden if they get that turn 1, they often lose a lot of their momentum, like for the following turns, and if they then can't build that up with trainer draw, Toad, whilst it doesn't trade particularly well with them, if you can't find energy with the Rayquaza, then you're doing no damage. You really sort of push yourself into a corner by going all out really quickly. But if you think Toad isn't going to be too much of an issue, I can understand why speed Rayquaza is a relatively okay play. I personally don't like it as much as the metal play. But with Virizions and the 1/1 Altaria, I suppose it still counters a lot of the meta, and you can still deal with a lot of the different threats out there. There's also sort of the Ray Raichu build, which is designed to really deal with sort of mirror match as well, because you've not only got Rays, but you've then got Raichu to sort of bounce their opposing Rays, which you can set up really quickly as well. And you don't even need that much. I think you need 5 Pokemon and then like a Muscle Band, so you don't even need Skyfield to be able to one-shot a Mega Ray on the opposing turn. So it's definitely really strong, but I think it's relatively inconsistent, just because you don't have the ability to get the energy back like you do with Bronzong. That's really why Metal Ray does so well, I think, because Bronzong just can sort of help stream the Rayquaza so much quicker, especially with Keldeo Float. You can really manipulate your energy so much, and be able to constantly apply pressure. And then finally there's the Ninetales build, which just locks in Skyfield, which means you're going to be doing huge damage every turn, which again I feel has the same inconsistencies as Raichu, because it's another stage 1 that you're probably going to run a 2-2 line of. So it may have the same inconsistencies as Raichu, but I think it's definitely, the Stadium War is so important at the moment, and Ninetales is definitely really important for being able to constantly do huge damage with Rayquaza. So if you can lock in the Stadium when you want to, they have to go out of their way, if they're not running Skyfield as well, they have to go out of their way to take out the Ninetales and then be able to bounce the Stadium the turn after, meaning that if you can set up another Ninetales, they've then got to go out of their way to deal with the Ninetales again. And if they're dealing with the Ninetales, they're not dealing with the Rayquaza, which means you can just sort of sit there and constantly swing and let them, if they want to pick off the Ninetales, then you can let them, because they're not dealing with this huge 220 HP attacker that you're throwing at them every turn that's doing 180 plus damage. It really means that they sort of go out of their way to knocking out your Ninetales, which they think is helping their strategy, but it's actually helping you more, because they're not devoting their resources into what's taking prizes, which is usually a very big Rayquaza. So there's definitely different ways you can play with Rayquaza at the moment. I still think Metal is the best way to play it and the most consistent way to play it, and I think it covers a lot of the meta, just because you can sort of have it as a semi-box build and run like a single Age Slash, a single Heatran. Keldeo Float obviously has synergy with the amount of lasers that are being played at the moment. There's just lots of different things you can do with Metal Ray, and that's why I think it's probably the best way to play Ray at the moment, personally.
Yeah, I think it is overall, just because you just have the options throughout the whole game as well. Like some of these other Ray, they're much more sort of YOLO-y, I guess is the best way to term it, although it's like a horrible saying. It is more just, you're trying to get the big one up, and if he can stay for 2 or 3 turns, you're going to win the game that way. And actually, I do quite like the Ninetales build a little bit. Maybe not so much now that Garbodor's like sort of creeping back in some of these decks. Like Manectric and Toad, they're both going to try and slip in Garbodor here and there, so you do have to worry about that a little bit. But it's a good thing to fill your bench. Like you'll still play the 1/1, maybe even a 2/2 Altaria if you have the space in the Ninetales build.
Yeah.
And then you can play like either 3 or 4 Vulpix and then the 2 Barrier Shrine, but then also 1 or 2 of the Capturing Up one, and you're just literally trying to speed those turns through. Make the 1 or 2 Ray that you can get going enough to get you the 6 prizes, which sometimes it can. Definitely if you can develop like an Altaria, you can sometimes just trade quickly enough against like Manectric. You are left slightly weaker to Toad because obviously you're weak to all the hammers and stuff already, but then you don't have Virizion to help you like stay healthy for the most part. I guess you could probably take one in there even, but that's when it starts getting clunky trying to get, jam in the Altaria plus the Ninetales plus the Virizion. It does get kind of crammed in there. But overall, I like Ray, big hitter. I think just the amount of Manectric still just puts a little black mark in my book for playing Ray. But yeah, the Metal deck can sometimes slow it down enough, or you can sort of avoid playing Ray for as long as possible until then you can get the one-hit knockouts when it's important, that it could still be a good play. Next up, let's talk about Raichu, the other Skyfield-based deck. It's kind of not in favour at the moment, I don't think, simply because of Aegislash. It's really needs its DCE. It's pretty much all it runs off of, and Metal can really hurt that a lot. And Toad also is an awkward matchup for Raichu. I think Raichu Bats is still the best way to play it, just because then you can kill Manectrics quite easily, even Megas. Like if you have Silver Bangle, which you probably play in your Raichu build over Muscle Band, because then you just need a Golbat drop to actually just kill Manectrics then and there. That's pretty good. I think you have a good Manectric matchup. If you play like a 1-1 or a 2-2 Leafeon, you can somewhat improve your Toad matchup, but it's still really shaky. But for me, I think the Metal is the worst thing for Raichu to deal with, because there's nothing you can just throw in there. Like even Leafeon, like 2 shots in Aegislash, plus they can just Keldeo float, move into something else, and then deal with the Leafeon, and then you've still got the Aegislash to deal with. So Raichu just can't handle the Metal matchup, really, in my opinion. Although Landorus is sort of not being played as much, we don't think. Like seeing US Nats, it really wasn't represented in the top tables. So I guess in that respect, it's a good thing for Raichu. But Metal is just a horrible matchup for that deck. So I'd really think twice before bringing Raichu to Worlds. Although it can be, a non-EX that can hit really hard for most things, your Metal matchup is going to be pretty grim.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, Raichu seems like it's sort of a better Ray, just because it's one prize instead of 2. But I think it has too many problems. It doesn't auto-lose to pretty much anything, but it has too many problems with the top sort of 4 that we've mentioned, which are Toad, Manectric, Metal, and Ray. It has small issues with all of them, which makes it so inconsistent. Not Ray, sorry, but like it doesn't auto-lose to anything, but it doesn't sort of constantly cover a matchup, especially with Leafeon not even be able to dealing with Toad anymore, and Metal seeing so much more play. Metal is such a big sort of issue for Raichu. So yeah, Raichu's sort of gone down in play overall. The next deck we've got is Kyogre. There's only one real way to play Kyogre. It's just sort of a Kyogre water box type thing with Keldeos and Suicunes. Obviously a really good deck. It was represented in quite high numbers in US Nats, especially getting into the later stages of the tournament. With Kyogre, the thing is, it can be really inconsistent. If you can get a Kyogre setup, if you can get the perfect board setup, you're more often than not are going to be able to win, just because you can really manipulate your energy, and they've got so many different water attackers that they can use for all these different situations. It's in a similar boat to Metal Box, just because they've got lots of different things they can do. And Suicune can completely swing games against things like Ray. It can completely sort of turn the matchup around. The issue being, you need a really good setup, and the deck is incredibly clunky. It's not a consistent deck. It's really hard to get set up, and it doesn't deal with some threats out there. There are some things that it deals with really well, and obviously there are things that Suicune completely walls. But unfortunately, Kyogre, I feel, isn't quite consistent enough to see a lot of play at Worlds. Worlds is all about consistency. That's why you're going to see a lot of Toad, a lot of Manectric, just because they're really consistent cards. You don't need a lot to set up your strategy. But Kyogre, you kind of need at least one Kyogre up just to be able to start manipulating energy, because otherwise you're only attaching one energy per turn, and because all of the water attackers have relatively high energy costs, it's just not going to be quick enough in the format at the moment. There aren't really any other ways you can play Kyogre, just this sort of water box type of build. It's done well in the past. It did well at US Nationals, but I think I don't think it's something to sort of follow suit by. I think it was a very lucky day, and I don't think Kyogre is able to deal with. I think Ray is too quick for it. I think Ray is a better Mega Pokemon, in all honesty, because it does as much damage. Well, it does technically more damage than Kyogre, and now there's so much more sort of Megas about. The 30 damage to each of the bench DXs isn't as important anymore. A lot of people would sort of base Kyogre around that and take 4 prizes in a turn. But there's so much Rayquaza. Right, you don't two-shot a Rayquaza by doing the bench damage anymore. You have to deal, I think it's at least 2 lots of bench damage, and they've still got 10 HP left, even if you then swing at them with a Tidal Storm while they're in the active. I think Kyogre's too slow at the moment, which is really unfortunate, because I love the concept of Kyogre. I think everyone kind of wants Kyogre to work because of just how much damage it can do and how cool this attack is, but I don't think it's quick enough compared to Ray anymore. I think Ray really sort of checks it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a bit harsh you said that on a lucky day.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, it won seniors. And it got 2.
Did it win seniors? Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
and it got 2 decks in the top 16 for masters. So I think it was a bit more than a lucky day. But I'll take your point on board. I think Landy Bats was hyped a lot more for US Nats than it is now being hyped for Worlds.
Yeah.
And Kyogre could just stomp that deck, so you can see how it did well at US Nats. Also, Raichu again was being hyped for US Nats, but isn't anymore because Kyogre could deal with it really well. I actually think matchup-wise it has a good matchup against Manectric because they have horrible times trying to like 3-shot that thing. And again, Suicune could be annoying even for Manectric decks. Against Toad, I mean, it's really awkward. It depends how you can like, if you can maybe break the lock with a Sleep Flip or something like that. For the Kyogre, but sometimes if you just get head-ringered, you just can't have access to your water energy. You can sometimes never really get going. But if you are able to start rolling, you can just let the Rough Seas do the work. And the Stadium Wall is definitely quite important. If you can lock down a Keldeo Float as well, that can be something that can really go in your favour against a Toad player. But if they're playing Garbodor, you don't have that accessibility. But at least the Manectric deck. The Manectric matchup is good. I think the Metal matchup is where Kyogre still can do its good old 4-prize sort of trick thing. It doesn't give a damn about stuff like Aegislash. It doesn't care about any of their techs. It can hit through Heatran and stuff. Its numbers are good enough for that sort of thing. So I think it's really good against Metal because they're capped at sort of awkward damage, especially when you consider Rough Seas healing off the Kyogre as well. So definitely against Manectric and Metal it can do well. Like you say though, Ray trades so nicely on it. As long as the Ray player has something to deal with 2 Suicune, they can win that game. But as we saw in the seniors, a lot of people just didn't have anything for these 2 Suicunes that I can't remember the senior winner, his name, but he basically just used Suicune throughout all of his top 8 games to win every game. He wasn't even attacking sometimes with it, he was just sitting there with it. So Kyogre has good and bad matchups. I think Toad is iffy and I think Ray could be better. Just relying on the Suicune doesn't sound good enough in my own personal opinion because people will sometimes start teching stuff in. But if you're expecting a lot of Manectric and Metal, Kyogre could be a good thing to bring, I think.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the other Primal. This is going to be Groudon. It really surprised me, US Nats. It was very underrepresented. I don't remember how many there were. I think it was only 1 Groudon deck in like top 32 or something like that for Masters. But Groudon, there's a couple of ways of playing it. I think because we're expecting Toad and Manectric to be good, therefore we can maybe see a creeping Groudon coming back. Even Rayquaza can struggle against Groudon just because it can use Focus Sash and then it deals with 2 Rayquazas quite easily to take the 4 prizes for your 1 Groudon. So there's of course a Wobbuffet build, which we all know. You're sitting behind Wobbuffet, slowing people down, slowing stuff like Ray down as best you can while you build up your Groudon team. Maybe go for a Scramble Switch play in there at some point. Then there's also the Turbo build, where you're not playing the Wobbuffets, you're trying to play like 2 or 3 Spirit Links in it as well with some Focus Sash, and you're using Landorus, the baby Landorus, to charge up your energy as well as Mega Turbos, so you can do it under Train Lock as well as just in every other matchup, I guess, so you get multiple Groudons out as best you can to try and just win that way. And like I say, a Scramble Switch play can help you out there. Also, there's the Dragonite build, where you're trying to rely on just 1 big Groudon with a Focus Sash, the sort of unbreakable combo, where you keep going down to just 10 HP, and then you max Wind, I think it's called.
Yeah.
It will back off you like 2 or 3 times, and you just let that 1 Groudon ride you to victory. I think all of these are pretty subpar compared to my favourite personally, which is the Donphan Groudon build. Donphan Groudon was doing really well pre Roaring Skies, I think it was. It was doing really well. It was like destroying some events. And I think going back to that build might not be a bad option. It has obviously a strong matchup against Manectric. I really enjoy the matchup against Rayquaza. A lot of people might contest that, but the way I would play it is you try and expend 5 prizes pretty much with your Donphans on your Horluchas and your Robosubs just to take 2 prizes, and then you let your Groudon with a Focus Sash take the remaining 4. And it's actually really easy to do because the Rayquaza player has no option in that situation. It's like a checkmate pretty much, and at least in my testing that's how it's worked out for the most part. Groudon can sometimes struggle with Metal. This is a thing. Definitely because Dialga could be an issue because they stop you attacking and then you're in an awkward spot where you've got to switch and switch back in, and Groudon players don't like wasting their switches, definitely not having to waste something like a scramble switch. It can be a bit annoying. They don't mind too much about Aegislash just because they play the Silent Lab, but overall it can have a pretty shaky matchup against Metal. It's not the best that it could be, but definitely Manectric and Ray, I would think the Donphan build is favoured. I think the Toad matchup is kind of awkward. It depends as well, like if you get head-ringered and all this stuff. Also, if you're getting dropped by bats, it can be more awkward, and if they play Manectric and this, that and the other. If it's more of like a straight Toad with Garbodor, I think Groudon really stomps that deck, just because their output isn't enough to deal with a Donphan for like, not a Donphan, a Groudon, for like the whole game. So if I was going to play Groudon, which I actually think is a pretty good play, I'd play it with Donphan and just have like a 2-2, or maybe even just the 1-1 of the Groudon to try and swing you in these matchups, because Donphan's still a viable strategy. And if people are trying to throw in cards like Garbodor, definitely like Manectric Garbodor, people are going to try and play that to metagame against everything, and then Donphan's just going to come in and destroy it. So I think it has options, really.
Yeah, Groudon's definitely, again, another sort of a sleeper. It was hardly seen at US Nats, but I think it's definitely a really good play at the moment. Onto the other fighting attacker the big fighting attacker, Landorus. Landorus is shaky. Landorus can do really well, especially the Bats version, which can just drop counters everywhere. But it has some really, really iffy matchups. Toad has always been... It can really be a struggle, especially as they're doing double damage on you. Despite Landorus doing a lot more damage, sort of attack-wise, sometimes you can't keep up with the Toad player when you haven't got items. Because you can't search out your Bats, you can't sort of get through your deck consistently to look for your strong energies. It can really struggle sometimes. They do have Horlucha a lot of the time, which can really sort of help with the Toad, but I feel Landorus is still a bit iffy with Toad sometimes, especially if they can't consistently search through their deck, which is what Toad tries to avoid. It just locks your opponent down, meaning that the Landorus player can't really look for all of these different things they need. Depending on what Manectric's paired with, it can either be really, really nice or really, really iffy. Manectric on its own obviously is weak to Landorus, which makes it a really nice matchup, but as soon as they start playing the Rough Seas build, the Toad build, again, this is where it sort of gets a little bit more iffy, because you're either dealing with Toad or you're dealing with water attackers, and as soon as your opponent sees that you're playing Landorus, they're going to play one Manectric maximum, and then they're just going to rely on water attackers, which you're weak to, so again, you're trading poorly with that. The Ninetales and Bats versions are a bit more better, because Manectric is obviously weak to Landorus, so you can really efficiently trade with those. Metal is, again, okay. It can be... I feel it can be iffy, just because Metal can always be really consistent, and Dialga is a real issue for Landorus, because it can just stop them attacking, because a lot of the time the Landorus player doesn't build up a Land's Judgment anymore to be able to deal with the Dialga in one shot. And again, obviously, Aegislash is really annoying because you can't use your strong energy against it, meaning that you're going to have to really dedicate a lot of bat drops to be able to do big damage to an Aegislash. Rayquaza is, again, an iffy matchup. Some people say they like the Landorus in favour of the Rayquaza, just because it can sometimes even outpace the Rayquaza. I personally don't like the Rayquaza matchup at all. I think Rayquaza is... The 20 resistance is just so important. A lot of people would consider it null and void, but the fact that you're not taking one-shot knockouts with Landorus anymore with Land's Judgment, it means that your the Hammerhead attacks are doing a lot less because you're reducing the 20 every time. And despite all the little toys that fighting Pokemon have, it's just... I don't feel it ever quite reaches Ray's HP to be able to consistently deal with 1 or 2 Rayquaza. And especially with Metal Ray, if they're running Aegislash as well, it's just another hurdle you've got to get over, which can really be an issue for Landorus. The other way of playing it would be sort of the Garbodor Raichu build, which is a bit more of a meta call, because the Raichu's there for the Rayquaza, the Garbodor can deal with Metal a bit better, and then you're only really worried about Toad. And Raichu can do okay against Toad, but again, it's a consistency thing. If the Toad trades relatively well with Landorus, especially with weakness and lasers, and if you can't search your deck and be able to get all of the pieces you need for Raichu, it's going to mean that you're sort of always one turn behind with the Toad, which is obviously what Toad does, which makes the Landorus matchup a little bit unfavoured, I think. I don't think it's going to see too much play. I think it's a consistent deck unless you're being locked down, and then I think it really struggles because you've unfortunately got weakness to the big locking deck at the moment. So I think Landorus is a bit of an iffy play, but it could take you to some higher rounds. But like I said, I feel it's a little bit shaky at the moment.
Yeah, it's definitely shaky at the moment. I mean, Toad you wouldn't expect to win. Like, it's definitely not a positive matchup for you. Ray is definitely not positive. Even like Manectric, which you think on paper is positive, people are going to play stuff like, even if they just play one Articuno, that can be such a pain for you. Resistance, it has weakness on you. It can take an extra prize when it kills a Landorus. And it has a Rough Seas. I mean, it's just a disgusting, just for a 1 card in a Manectric player's list. There's plenty of ways Landorus can get beat quite hard. The Raichu Garb is fairly interesting. It can definitely help against Metal and stuff, like you say. And I like the Call of Garbodor overall. Just shutting stuff down makes you a bit safer against other things. And also Raichu's going to try and rebalance your Ray matchup, which could otherwise be awkward. And of course, Garbodor shuts down their Altaria if they're going to play that, so you're always going to make the strides with the Raichu. So I guess it's sort of trying to cover the types on Rayquaza and Manectric. But yeah, like we say, if they're playing Rough Seas and Water, that's not even ideal for you. So Landorus, I think it's shrinking in play just because the meta's not perfect for it anymore. So I don't think it should be the top pick really for Worlds. It was pretty much at the peak of its powers when people were all hyping Raichu and all hyping Night March in the early stages when Roaring Skies came out. So not so much the powerhouse anymore that it once was. Let's move on to Night March now. It really, again, didn't do too well US Nats wise. That's because at US Nats it was pretty much a bat fest for the most part. There was some ingenuity with like Metal and Kyogre and stuff like that popping up here and there, but it was still quite a bit of a bats fest at US Nats, and that really just destroys Night March. Even if you're playing cautiously with like Pump Caboose the whole game, never even benching Joltix, I mean they're still just going to eventually out bat drop you. But that being said, Night March, it can still come in swinging, just getting a big damage output in. There's pretty much the best way to play it, I think, is the Empoleon Archie build. You just get more draw power out of that deck. It helps you like end proof yourself as well. Gets you, even if you're stuck with Night Marches in hand, it gives you an out to get extra damage via the diving draw. So, and of course he's a help against Landorus. I mean, we've just discussed that it's not going to be too prevalent anymore, but it's still an attacker if you do face the Landorus player. So I think that's the best way of playing it, just for the extra draw engine, and like I say, it gets you into the cards that you need at the time. The only other thing that I would consider is playing a Bouffalant actually, and this is the Bouffalant that can do 80 damage for 3 colourless energy and discard a special from your opponent's active Pokemon. I saw this used in UK Nationals actually by Fraser Anderson, who got top 16 with Night March. He was a very good player. I actually happened to play against him myself, and he played this Bouffalant to help out against Seismitoad. I think this is a very creative way of dealing with Toad. This was even when Trump Card was still in format, he was playing this. So even then they could recycle the DCs and it was still a good play right then. Now they are limited to the amount of DCs a Toad player can have, and they're limited to the amount that they have access to. Definitely when you're using Muse Versatile, you're just needing a DC yourself with the Dimension Valley in play, to both Quaking Punch your opponent, and also when you want to, you can try and discard their energy and maybe break yourself out of the lock. So there's a couple of routes Night March can go down to try and tech for either Toad or just in general have more draw power. Overall, I think with the amount of bats shrinking, as we've just mentioned, that Landorus isn't the best play, and Raichu Bats probably isn't the best play either. Night March sort of is unchecked at the moment, and it could just come in swinging hard, doing its thing, doing the old Night March. It's probably like the most consistent deck I can think of, to be honest. It just gets it done pretty much every game. So it's actually quite a nice one to pick, I'd say.
Yeah, I've been playing Night March online a lot lately, and it's definitely got the consistency, especially with the Empoleon. Those extra 2 cards, whilst they seem relatively insignificant, they're really, really strong. So yeah, definitely one to think about. And finally, we're going to just briefly mention Wailord. Wailord obviously threw up a storm at US Nationals that there was a lot of people not expecting it, and thus it got to top 2. The problem with Wailord now is people know how to deal with it, and some people are even teching against it. I think Wailord did really well at US Nationals simply because no one knew what to do against it until they'd played 1 or 2 games and they'd really established, okay, I need to avoid doing this, I need to not expend resources. But now people have clocked on how to do that, and like I say, some people are even taking in Bunnelbees to deal with that. As soon as you see a Bunnelbee on the Wailord side, you basically really, really have an uphill battle. So whilst Wailord's definitely something you could see, it's definitely not one we're recommending because a lot of people know how to play against it. There was such a surge of people playing it online as soon as US Nationals ended. I had 3, 4, 5 straight games against Wailord. Everyone just tried it, which meant everyone knows how to play against it now. So we're here to say, if you want to play Wailord, on your own head be it, because we don't think it's right at the moment. And, well, we don't think it's right anymore because it loses a lot with the rotation. It was quirky at US Nationals, but ultimately I think it did well because people didn't know what they were doing against it. And thus it wasn't until it got to the final where Jason had probably, I heard he played 3 or 4 hours worth of games the night before his finals match just to be able to know how to deal with this Wailord matchup. And I think that's what really pulled through at the end of the day, because if you can deal with the matchup, there's very little sort of surprises the Wailord can spring on you, especially like Jason K knew the exact list. There was nothing that his opponent could drop where he was like, oh, I didn't expect this, I didn't know what to do against this. There's very little the Wailord player can do anymore. It had the surprise factor at US Nationals, but nowadays I don't think it quite has, for Worlds at least, I don't think it quite has the ability to do as well anymore, which is kind of upsetting to say because it was such a quirky, fun deck. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's a particularly good deck, and I think it's had its sort of quote unquote day because people know what they're doing now, and they know what to expect if their opponent turns over a Wailord. If they play Bunnelbee, they search for the Bunnelbee. If not, they really just don't expend resources and see how quickly they can take 6 prizes.
Yeah, I mean, even just the fact that we got to see those games on stream, it gives so many people so many pointers of how to play that matchup. And let's be fair, it's Worlds. Everyone's a high standard player now, and they're not going to go in untested against Wailord, even if it was just a few weeks ago when Wailord first blew up. People know how to manage their resources and stuff. If they go into Worlds, they know all of these things. You can see at US Nats maybe a few rounds where someone gets caught by a Hue for 10 cards or something like that because they thought they were doing the right thing and then they just lose half their hand or whatever. And you could see people trying to dig through resources and then getting caught out by, a Cassius or something like that for US Nats. That's not going to happen at Worlds. We know the deck now. It's not just this hidden thing that you never really know what your opponent's going to do. And you can imagine people seeing a Wailord that your opponent flips over and everyone's excited, oh great, I've got a free win here. It's Wailord. I know I can beat this. This is a bad card, right? now people at Worlds know, like, it's good, it's a strategy, but now we know how to negotiate that deck. And yeah, like you say, Bunnelby is a 1-card inclusion to beat that entire deck. And I think there is space for it in some decks. Like Rayquaza could benefit from playing it anyway, just for like recovering DCs or something. If you're not playing the Bronzong based build, like if you're a speed based build, the Bunnelby can be really helpful. It means you can play like certain one-offs, like a Silent Lab or something, so that you can get around Safeguarders as well, and Bunnelby can recover it if you really need to in a certain matchup. So I can see Bunnelby being played even if people aren't expecting Wailord, just on the off chance they get basically a free win. So Wailord, yeah, I don't think it's a play at all anymore now that it's been revealed.
Yeah.
Someone should have saved it for Worlds.
Yeah. That's pretty much everything we wanted to go over. We're just going to say quickly what we think our picks would be. I think, for me personally, it'd be Rough Seas Manectric. Either that or Toad Manectric. I think Manectric's a really good check for a lot of the meta at the moment. And Ray is going to be represented in a relatively high capacity no matter what. So I think Rough Seas Manectric has a very good chance of doing quite well. I think if Ray is as popular as a lot of people think it will be.
Yeah, I think Manectric's a good shout there, but I'm actually going to go for a bit of a roguish concept. I hope some of you Worlds competitors are going to listen to me. Go for a Donphan Groudon. If you haven't tested Donphan in a while, pick it up with like a 3-3 Donphan, 2-2 Groudon, see how that works. With a good couple of Focus Sash in there, you will steal wins against Manectric players, even if they are playing these techs. Like, you play the Silent Lab to get through the Suicunes and stuff, you can beat down on their Articunos when you go into the Groudon anyway. There's nothing really that they can deal with for that, definitely not, because their output isn't high enough. You can scrap out wins against Toad, that's still quite awkward, but if you just play like high Horlucha counts, you can buy yourself enough turns where the Groudon player can pretty much overcome them. And the Ray matchup, although it sounds dodgy, trust me, it will work if you're playing the Donphan build. Jack knows that all too well. So,
yeah.
Donphan Groudon can really do well against, the top 4 that we've mentioned, really. And even then, it can beat on stuff like Kyogre. And if you are worried about Wailord as well, Groudon is still a great way to just destroy that deck, because you can hit above and beyond its HP. So that would be my pick for Worlds. So yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we've covered quite a lot of decks there. I don't think we've had too long a video. If there are any particular decks you want a little bit more information on, either let one of us know, or if you want a deck list, I'm sure we've probably got time. If you contact us relatively quickly before Worlds, we could probably do some analyses. If you want to see a Donphan Groudon list, we could probably get one up. Same with...
I've got one.
if there's anything you particularly want to see, just let us know in the comments, or either on Facebook or Twitter, anything like that. And we will be happy to help. Other than that, we want to know what you think is going to win Worlds, whether you're going or not. What deck would you like? What do you think could see taking the throne this year? We've given you our take on what we think is going to be really consistent and really good decks to play. Maybe you've got a deck that we haven't mentioned that you think could creep in and sort of sweep the carpet from under everyone's feet. So let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you guys think, and like I say, if you want any specific lists or anything, just let us know as well. But by that, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack, today here with Joe, discussing what we think we're going to see in Worlds, and we'd love to see you in another video. Thank you very much for watching.